On May 10th, 2023, former Vice President Kamala Harris shared an old quip from her late mother that went viral on social media. Some of you may have heard about the "you think you just fell out of a coconut tree" line. Maybe you saw all the coconut memes and had no idea what was going on. Well, at the White House event for the swearing in of the President's Advisory Commission on Advancing Educational Equity, Excellence, and Economic Opportunity for Hispanics, former Vice President Harris was talking about the importance of contextual awareness in the discussion of how to support young people. She noted that we cannot approach supporting young people without being curious to learn about their environment, including the needs of their families, teachers, and communities. That is when she shared the anecdote about her mother. She said, "None of us live in a silo. Everything is in context. My mother used to give us a hard time sometimes. She would say to us, 'I don't know what is wrong with you young people. You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and came before you.'" End quote. Though Harris's coconut tree line may seem silly at face value, it was actually a Sankofa moment. Today, during and after service, we are returning to our Souls in Solidarity series and our guiding text, Liberating Church, a 21st Century Hush Harbor Manifesto. Today's liberating mark is Sankofa. You see the bird up on our silk behind you. The principle of Sankofa comes to us from Ghana. An Ndinkra symbol of the Akan people, Sankofa is a mystical bird who flies forwards while looking backwards, the egg of the future clutched in its mouth. The term Sankofa in the Twi language of the Akan people is an instruction to go back and get it. Now, Dorcas isn't here with us today, but as some of you may know, the Twi language is her native tongue. And one day you will have to ask her about my pronunciation. But the saying the term Sankofa comes from is, "Sewa where finan wosan kofa Yankee." And English, approximately, it is not taboo to go back and fetch what is at risk of being left behind. Kamala Harris's Sankofa moment was shared with her signature laughter. It was a natural, instinctive gesture not to leave the wisdom of her mother behind. In reaching for her mother's advice, Harris shares an evergreen lesson. We do not exist in a vacuum, but indelibly connected to the history that brought us to this point. Sankofa in method and message. Not only are we connected to the past, we can mine the past for lessons, lights, and tools that can help us live better in the present. In our scripture lesson for today, so beautifully read by Sally and Carol, Rachel does Sankofa quite literally. She goes back into her father's home and fetches what everyone tacitly assumed should be left behind. There is a roiling conflict between Laban and Jacob, and as ever, the women get caught in the crosshairs. Jacob realizes that he has fallen out of favor with and been deceived by his father-in-law. Despite this, God has come to him in a dream and instructed him of how to amass wealth, despite Laban's exploitation. Having found a loophole in Laban's plan and with God's help, Jacob amasses quite the herd for himself and then prepares to make a great escape before Laban can retaliate. This will entail taking his wives from the family home they have always known. While Jacob is busy worrying about himself and the ways Laban wronged him, Rachel and Leah come to a realization. In cheating Jacob, their father has cheated them too. With this revelation, they fully side with Jacob, encourage him to heed his God, and together begin planning for their collective escape as a new family unit. There is but one conundrum. The women must leave their household and along with it, their household gods. These household gods or idols were their ancestors. For the culture of the time, gods were very local, familial. At this point in the Bible, we are only at the beginning of the process of the God of Abraham and Jacob becoming recognized as a more expansive God. We have to wait one more whole chapter before Jacob wrestles God and is renamed Israel, and even more time before the tribes of Israel emerge from his many sons. Consequently, the title that many of us know, the God of the Israelites, is, for now, pending. For now, God as we know God is very local, a household God of Jacob, inherited from his father Isaac and grandfather Abraham before him. When Rachel and Leah married Jacob, they would have entered into a new relationship not only with him, but also with his God. Now, at this point in the story, Jacob had been toiling for Laban over a decade, going on 2, just to be able to marry Laban's daughters. Still, suffice it to say, Rachel and Leah are about to take a leap of faith in fleeing with Jacob under the guidance of his God. Perhaps wisely, Rachel takes a parachute. When Rachel steals her father's household idols, the representations of her ancestors, she enacts a resistant yet awkward Sankofa maneuver. She seeks to take a precious part of the world she has always known with her into her new world. We don't get a peek into Rachel's interior thoughts and feelings as she decides to snatch her ancestors for the road, but we can guess at why she wanted them, maybe for comfort and protection, like spiritual guardians, or for guidance and second opinions as she follows her husband and his God, who are both still somewhat unfamiliar. Or maybe for rememory, so she doesn't forget the coconut tree she fell from, doesn't become subsumed in her husband's history at the loss of her own. Whatever the reason may be, those household gods clearly meant a lot to Rachel. So much so, she resorts to trickery to take and keep them, lying about being on her period so her father won't search the saddlebags beneath her. There's a rich parallelism in the fact that Jacob, the man who tricked his brother out of his inheritance, has now married Rachel, who resorts to trickery in order to secure an inheritance for herself. Just as the image of the Sankofa bird conjures, taking what we need from the past can be an awkward maneuver. By bringing survival tools and guiding lights from the past on our journeys into the future, we cause worlds to collide, and sometimes there are consequences. Jaslyn Harris explains how Sankofa became a part of hush harbor practices for the enslaved Africans in America. She reminds us that enslaved peoples had to, quote, carve out space where they could remember what they were forced to leave behind. Like Rachel, they had to be sneaky in order to do Sankofa, because at the root of Sankofa is resistance against taboos. Like Rachel, the enslaved Africans were expected to leave their ancestors behind, to sever ties with the old ways of the old world in favor of the Christian God of their new world, the Christian God who, lest we forget, is the God of Jacob. Like Rachel, many enslaved Africans who had Christianity forced on them took risks to choose both and instead of succumbing to either or. They brought their ancestors with them, often mixing the guidance and protections of their ancestors with their adoption of a God who liberates and a Christ who saves, creating marriages of spiritualities and traditions taboo to white European Christianity. I couldn't leave you today without doing a little more Sankofa work with one of my favorite literary ancestors, Toni Morrison. This past Tuesday was her heavenly birthday, which she shares with none other than Audre Lorde. another favorite ancestor of mine. When in doubt, you cannot go wrong practicing Sankofa with the wisdom of these women. In her 2004 commencement speech at Wellesley College, Toni Morrison didn't pull punches with the class of extraordinary young women graduating in the wake of the invasion of Iraq. She didn't use the word Sankofa per se, but she did indeed teach them why Sankofa matters. She told them, "The past is already in debt to the mismanaged present. And besides, contrary to what you may have heard or learned, the past is not done, and it is not over. It's still in process, which is another way of saying that when it is critiqued, analyzed, it yields new information about itself. The past is already changing as it is being re-examined, as it is being listened to for deeper resonances. Actually, it can be more liberating than any imagined future if you are willing to identify its evasions, its distortions, its lies, and are willing to unleash its secrets." End quote. As you go out in the world to practice Sankofa, don't forget that the world will not want you to unleash those secrets. Some of the ancestors we will reach for were unwanted, unloved, and besieged in their own times. The forces of their day sought to cut them down, and the forces of ours seek to erase them. Invoking them, calling upon their wisdom, communing with them, and taking them along with us poses trouble. Good trouble, but trouble still. The evils that seek to cut us down and erase us, well, they won't like to see those ancestors coming. When we reach back for those ancestors that resisted evil and survived against the odds, taking them along with us makes us a little more whole. That in and of itself is resistance in a world seeking to break us. That resistance makes a just future a little more possible.